grab me. I mean, if they say if you can lead, it's a sign of really quality style. Self-awareness is a supreme gift, a treasure as precious as life. This is what makes us human, but it comes with a costly price, the wound of mortality. Our existence is forever shadowed by the knowledge that we will grow, blossom, and inevitably diminish and die. I mean, I like the cadence of that. I like the rhythm of that. I mean, it's also right to the point in the heart of what you're writing about
Thank
here.
you.
And let's talk about what you're writing about here. It's sort of like Hemingway said, all stories end in death.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm writing about it. I've deliberately chosen the title of the terror of death rather than the anxiety of death. I think anxiety about death is just hardwired into us, and we're going to be dealing with that always. But I'm talking about people who live in terror, and the book is informed by a lot of people I've worked with for whom death became such a terror that it obsessed them, took over their lives. So I'm looking at how I deal with terror of death, and looking at how people have dealt with it through the centuries. It's been the topic of many great philosophers.
It certainly has, and as you say, is at the heart of most religions, really, as well. But it's not only death terror.
I think it's the mother of all religions.
I thought death is the mother of beauty, at least according to Wallace Stevens. But actually, I kept thinking about that paradox in reading your book, because it is the sense of death and the awareness of death that you say can save us. But what do you mean by save? Redemption?
No, not save us in that way, but I think save us in a way of living our lives in a richer, more vibrant way. Meditation upon death has been, we've been heard that counsel for centuries, but the idea of keeping death in mind rather than avoiding the sight of it can really change our lives, make us value our lives, make us feel our days and hours more poignantly and richer.
Can also cast a shadow, though, obviously.
It casts a shadow, but if you look at the shadow long enough, maybe you see the brighter part of that. There's the monks used to keep a skull in their cells for many centuries, just to remind them
Memento mori.
Mortality. That's right, exactly. Yeah.
Poor Yorick, I knew him well. You talk about though the awakening process, awakening experience, and you give many grief at the loss of someone you care for, life-threatening illness, breakup of an intimate relationship, a major milestone like a birthday, cataclysmic trauma, children leaving home, loss of a job or a career change, retirement, move to a retirement home, or powerful dreams. All of these things can awaken us to our mortality.
Right, exactly. And that idea came up for me quite some time ago when I was starting to think about writing a book on an existential approach to therapy. I'm talking about 25 years ago now, and I wanted to start to educate myself clinically, to work with patients who were dealing with this. And at that point, in your everyday patient, I really couldn't find people who could talk about it. There was always so much evasion. Now, I know a great deal more about how to help people uncover these things, but at that point, I found difficulty, so I decided I'd work with a population of people who could not get it out of their minds. I started to work with people with metastatic cancer, with cancer which had spread, and in those days, there was really no hope, so they were having to face death. And to my surprise, at that point, I worked for years, a whole decade, as a matter of fact, with people, mostly women with breast cancer, and formed groups of them. And to my surprise, there was a substantial number of people, perhaps a third, maybe more, who rather than become numbed with despair, had an awakening. They began to live their life more richly. They began to say, that they are reprioritizing, they're trivializing the trivia in life. Beginning when I heard them say, "What a pity it is I had to wait till now to learn how to live," or that I've grown wise as a result of this confrontation. For me, that was my awakening experience of this whole topic in a way. And since then, I built on that. You don't have to wait till you're faced with imminent death to have that kind of experience.
Well, you're trying to wake up therapists here too. I mean, you say early on that they tend to avoid it for the most part. It's that taboo of death.
Oh, I'm definitely trying to do that. And many therapists will say, why are we talking about this? It never comes up in my treatment with patients, but I think it doesn't come up if you don't want to see it. Or it doesn't come up if you're really uncomfortable in dealing with the topic yourself. I think you really as therapists, you have to deal with your own mortality and your own death anxiety. I can tell you an example of that. When I was started my training, I was at Johns Hopkins psychiatric resident, entered a orthodox psychoanalysis, 700 hours, never came up, never talked about it. It was only later when I started working with patients who were facing cancer, I began to have an enormous amount of personal death anxiety and went back into treatment another time. Chose a therapist who I thought more familiar with this, with Rollo May. So it does not come up ordinarily in courses of therapy. Therapists may avoid it, may not see it, or they may say to themselves or to the patient, well, we can't do anything about this. Let's get on to something neurotic, something we can do something about.
Although you do write about that orthodox psychoanalysis, I think the analyst's name was Olive Smith, and reaching out to you in a moment that was really a very special moment having to do with death, which gets to another subject that you explore here, that is how much therapists ought to self-disclose and how much they ought to reveal of themselves. But before we get into that and other things that I want to talk with you about in this book, which has a lot of richness in it, what can therapists really do, and when do you separate death anxiety from death terror, or how?
Well, I think we offered two things. One of the things there are ways to help diminish death anxiety, and we can go into those as we go, but there's another thing is that we can do a lot more than that. That's the other thing we were just talking about. We can help use the confrontation with death as a fulcrum to help people change and grow a great deal more. So I think both of these steps are important. But mainly, I think the first step is to be able to talk about it. Let the patient voice all their concerns. It's there in therapy. It comes up. If you start looking at dream life, nightmares are always dreams of naked death anxiety that's sort of escaped its corral. And I look for this. I'm very interested in when nightmares appear.
Are we still assuming that dreams or nightmares are the royal road to our unconscious? Or
I believe that very sincerely.
You've read Dobson and the Harvard people talk about us just flushing our...
Sure. And, Freud said that. Freud, in his original book on the interpretation of dreams, he looked at previous theories, and that was certainly one of them. Well, it's a way of getting rid of all the excretia from daily life. Yeah. But I think a better way of looking at it, there are events of everyday life in there. They're the sort of building stones for dreams. But we use these to build the edifice and put other deeper meanings onto them. Why are we selecting these particular events rather than other events? They don't form the whole character of the dream. So I use dreams often in therapy. In fact, lately, with the new age, I have patients email me their dreams, so I have them in front of me when we talk. And
new age, you mean internet? You don't mean new age like...
No. Right. No, definitely. Internet.
We're talking with Irvin Yalom. His new book is Staring at the Sun, Overcoming the Terror of Death. Where do we decide the Rubicon is between, again, terror and anxiety here?
Well, it's when the anxiety is, when the concerns about death are disturbing our tranquility, when we can't get them out of our mind. I'll give you an example. Patient comes up to see me. She drove a couple of hours to see me, had her father and an uncle in the car, beautiful day, looking at the scenery, but she says, I keep thinking everything's going to pass. My uncle, my father, how long will I be able to see them? They're going to disappear. The trees are all going to disappear. Everything's going to turn gray. It takes away my sense of beauty. It disrupts everything that I see. That's the kind of thing that I mean where death is really kind of taken over, the fear of oblivion, the fear of transiency. So it disturbs one's equanimity. So that's a good example.
It's also an example that seems to me really illustrative of what you want to get at in this book when you talk about, Pierre in War and Peace, use a lot of literary references, but it's the same thing. I like the fact that you parenthetically added that this is what happened to Dostoevsky, literally.
Oh yes.
Being ready to face the firing squad, you're getting ready to literally be shot and then suddenly saved. And the sense of awakening, that kind of close call with death. Anybody can tell those stories. Boy, I came with such a close call that it awakened me in such a extraordinary way.
Sure. And I think it's always a mistake when you think of history of psychiatry, a history of psychotherapy starting in the 19th century. It really began with the great writers and the great thinkers. So I mine the great novelists and the great philosophers, and I think these are really the forerunners of our field. So